Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Bold TV. It's a big news day today with a preliminary Kavanaugh Senate vote scheduled for 10:30 a.m. today, Eastern, and we will keep you updated on that. We are lucky today to have guest host Sonia Osorio. She's president of the National Organization for Women here in New York with us today. Welcome, Sonia.
Thank you, Carrie.
So tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Well, it has been very, very busy. Everybody, we started with the Kavanaugh nomination and really being very concerned with his positions on Roe v. Wade and potentially reversing women's rights to choose, his papers that he's written about presidential powers, and that's the last thing we need under the Trump administration. And then, of course, everything that we know that's happened in the last 2 weeks. So we've been in D.C. last week, and we have been getting people on the phones to, take action to let their elected leaders know how they feel.
Sure, and that's what democracy is all about: conversation, bipartisan dialogue. So we are so glad you're here, Sonia, for the ride. And thank you all for joining us. Bold TV is brought to you by Independent Women's Forum, a nonprofit dedicated to developing and advancing policies that aren't just well-intentioned, but actually enhance people's freedom, choices, and opportunities. Our show is exciting for you today. Make sure to leave your comments, questions on Facebook and Twitter. We will throw them to our guests as they're coming in live. They have to be smart, though. We had a lot going on, and I was on CNN earlier this week, and I wanted to play the clip because I wanted to then get our guests to react to it. So let's play the clip first, and then I'll introduce our guest.
You are reflecting many Democrats who are fundamentally rejecting due process, forensic evidence, data, statistics. I mean, everything that would build a legitimate case to present sexual assault. We are telling women you don't actually need to do that. And the way you protect yourself, as Gretchen Carlson told me in an interview, is about evidence. And if we don't believe in evidence, we don't have a judicial system. If we don't have a judicial system, we do not have the rule of law.
So, strong debates going back and forth, and I am so glad that today joining us is Vanessa Rubel. She's the founder of the Women's March on Washington and co-founder and executive director of March on Washington. Welcome, Vanessa. So just as a conservative, I am a strong supporter of Judge Kavanaugh, but I'm so glad you're here to talk to us. What's your response to that argument about, rule of law and evidence, to say, evidence matters, and when people say believe someone, to me that almost sounds like a faith position, to say I have to believe someone in a religious way with no evidence when I believe in evidence as the rule of law?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me today. Those are two separate questions, and so let's go one and then the other, but of course we'll probably get distracted along the way. So the first thing is, I think the reason why people say believe is that probably we have all experienced as women in this room how often we have not been believed about things that have happened to us, and especially about sexual assault. I don't know if either one of you have had that experience of...
I have, and I talked about it on CNN and MSNBC.
Yeah. So I think that when women have been put to the side and disbelieved and gaslit for so long, it's really important to say to women, I believe you, I hear you and I believe you. And I think that regarding evidence, I think if we were actually concerned about evidence, we wouldn't have an investigation that was 3 days long and didn't interview, dozens of people who came forward to talk about it. So.
Well, and was the investigation, though, it was similar in length to what happened with Anita Hill in terms of the time of the length of the interview with the FBI, which I think the general consensus of the FBI, that was a robust enough time frame to interview people who were needed.
I mean, I would disagree with you there. I don't think I've heard from the FBI saying they thought that this was robust. I think we've heard from a lot of retired FBI people and people in different branches of government saying this is not okay. We are not giving this enough due time, and this is a sham investigation. So I think that people have expressed a lot of concern about it.
And I think this issue that we're talking about, where people are speaking out and saying, I believe her, of course, there's a court of law and we need evidence. But Judge Kavanaugh is not on trial. I mean, this really is a really important job interview for him. And at the end of the day, the senators are just going to vote for themselves on how they believe about it. But it's less about I believe her, although I know that's what we say. It's really about I don't immediately disbelieve her. And this we even see. The National Organization for Women does a lot of work in the criminal justice system. Here, even in New York City, where we get calls from women and we actually help them navigate reporting their sexual assault because they're coming to us with stories like, first of all, it's a 911, they've immediate outcry, and they're sitting there with a detective. It's like, come on. So you step out on your husband every once in a while. Come on, you can tell us. Spending more time trying to dissuade her from reporting or trying to break her down in those immediate immediate moments, rather than just listening to her. So it's more appropriate would be listen.
Right. Well, and I think that's where the bipartisan agreement, I think if there's anything from this episode, is to say we need to be so much better about empowering women when something has happened to them so that they don't have to feel shame, that they don't have to feel guilt, that they immediately can protect themselves. And I wrote a piece about this on our Bold website earlier this week about, and mentioned some research and reporting that one of our producers had done last year, that even when, rape kits are, have been collected and the evidence is there, very oftentimes the police will sit on that, and that is completely unacceptable.
There's an enormous backlog of rape kits, and that's a huge. And I just don't think. I mean, I think that this is what happens when you have men making decisions about an entire population. Is the things that deeply affect women do not get focused on.
And what you have to consider here, you have the actual evidence, and then you're literally having, the government saying, but we don't really care about it. So.
Right, which is a big problem.
Yeah.
And if this entire situation with Kavanaugh can move us and shine a spotlight on it, I think that is a very worthy outcome, and it's something that I think we can reach across the aisle and push for that. But
and that's happening, right?
Yeah.
And what type of response are you getting from the public and from the people that are associated with your organization? Do you have any?
I've never seen women so angry. Basically, people are on Facebook saying all kinds of things that I probably shouldn't say on the show. But I've never seen women so angry. I've seen. the level of furor is the level at when Trump was elected, and I think that women are. I think that it will, if he gets confirmed. I think it will tear the country apart, personally. And I am concerned about that.
Do you have any plans for getting out in the street, any marches?
Yes, we do. So we really believe that we need to get out there and vote. If we are raging, and we are right now, we need to take it to the streets. So we are marching. We are not only just marching, but we are marching directly to the polls, to the ballot boxes, and we are going to have our voices heard and felt there, and we will vote them out.
Last week was National Voter Registration Day, big proponent of that. And I think to what you're saying about tearing the country apart, I believe that where there's a will, there's a way, as far as whether our country is united or divided. And I do believe that it really is through democracy and exercising our rights and the ballot box. Where there's a will, there's a way. We can bring the country together, but it's just making sure people are heard, exercising their democratic rights, and just, crossing the aisle the way you did today. And thank you so much for joining us. We hope you'll come back.
Thank you.
For our next segment, we have David Boaz joining us on Skype. David is the Executive Vice President of the Cato Institute, and we are going to be talking here about the new trade deal that you might have heard, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, aka USMCA. Welcome, David.
Thank you.
Hi, David. So tell us a little bit about this trade deal. Do you think it's a good deal? And secondly, do you think Trump is actually fulfilling his campaign promise?
Well, this deal is a little bit worse than NAFTA was, but it's not a disaster. And for those of us who believe in free trade, that's a sigh of relief. So, yay, it's not a disaster. There are some minor good parts of it. There are some significant bad parts of it. All in all, it won't make that much difference. when you ask, is Trump fulfilling his campaign promise? Well, his campaign promise on trade was to do harm to Americans. And so the fact that you can argue that this trade deal doesn't do much harm, I guess means he hasn't really fulfilled his campaign promise, but that's a good thing.
And so so the components, so one thing in particular was talking about components with cars and the requirements that X percentage of components in cars are made among the 3 countries. And that increased to 75% from 62.5%. What was the thinking behind that? Do you think it actually might save some auto jobs or no?
No, probably not. From a free trader's point of view, all of these trade agreements are managed trade. A free trade agreement ought to take 1 page. We won't have any tariffs or other trade barriers between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. That's your trade deal. So all of these 2,000-page agreements are manipulating trade for 2 reasons. One, that there are special interests in each country that want this provision or that provision in there. And 2, because some people don't understand economics. We have known since 1776 that free trade benefits countries on both ends of the deal. It benefits producers and consumers, but we have a few people, including, unfortunately, President Trump, who simply don't understand this basic aspect of economics. So you're right about the numbers there. We already had a managed trade deal that insisted that 62.5% of components be made in North America. Now it's 75%. What that means is cars will get more expensive. It would be more expensive to produce automobiles in North America.
David, did we see cars get more expensive when NAFTA was put that previous mandate in place?
No, because it wasn't that, because that number wasn't that far off of what was actually going on at the time. So I don't think it had that much, made that much difference. But since NAFTA, 25 years, we have created a North American automobile production market. And so when you introduce these disruptions into a well-functioning, well-integrated market, you know, they say some car parts cross the U.S.-Canadian border 8 times during production. We're going to disrupt that by insisting on these kinds of things. The other aspect of the automobile deal is the requirement that Mexican auto workers make at least $16 an hour. It's a progressive thing. It's more and more over the coming years. That's about 3 times what Mexican auto workers make right now. So what does that mean? It means it's going to get more expensive to make cars in Mexico, and it will mean probably that some inexpensive cars become simply too expensive to produce in North America, partly in Mexico, partly in the United States. And the logical thing to do in that case is move that production to Asia, where they can do it more cheaply.
So you actually think it'll be cheaper to make cars in Asia because of this?
It won't be cheaper it will not get cheaper in Asia, but it will be cheaper to make some low.
No, I mean cheaper to make a car in Asia versus a car in North America. Is that what you're saying?
Some companies will, yes.
And David, what does this mean for our relationship with Canada? Is this a repaired relationship now?
Well, it's repaired in the sense that we ended up getting out of it on the other end without any real harm. And by the way, one minor benefit of this deal is that we did open up the Canadian agricultural market a little bit. You heard a lot about Canada protecting its dairy industry. We opened that up a little bit. The quid pro quo was we opened up the U.S. agricultural market a little bit, and so that's a good thing. The bottom line, though, is we kind of spent a year beating up on our closest ally to end up with nothing much changing. And so, yes, the relationship is better than it was a week or a month ago, but Canada is not going to forget that the United States turned on them and blamed them for America's trade problems. The real reason that there are fewer manufacturing jobs in the United States is not trade, it's that technology is getting better. We can produce things more efficiently with fewer people. You have factories now that used to have a lot of people working there, and now they have 6 people and a bunch of robots. And that's a good thing. It makes products cheaper. And that's what you want in an economy. You want people to be able to access the goods that the economy produces. But it does mean that there will be job shifts. Some jobs will be lost, some jobs will be gained.
So, but how big was the market that was closed off by the Canadians as it relates to dairy or even other products? Do you know? Give us a sense of the scope in terms of the nominal dollars.
No, I'm sorry. I don't have a number on that. But look, the U.S. dairy industry is not that big. The Canadian market is not that big. So it wasn't that big a deal. If you are an American dairy in the northern tier of the United States, then you'd like to be able to sell in Canada. And there were definitely limits on that. There are still limits, but they're a little looser than they were. So it's not making that much difference. But every country in the world has some of these little protectionist things, even as we've done a great job since World War II of reducing trade barriers around the world. Still pretty hard to export rice to Japan. Light trucks, there's a 25% tariff on importing them into the United States from Europe. This is a ridiculous protectionist measure that's held over from the Lyndon Johnson days.
But hasn't Trump said that he wants to have zero tariffs across the board, and that would be his ideal scenario? And in the meantime, we'll just come up with these, mid solutions.
For 30 years, Donald J. Trump has campaigned for protectionism. He has complained that free trade hurts American workers, hurts American businesses. When he became president of the United States and he installed America's leading protectionists in all the relevant jobs, U.S. Trade Representative, et cetera, and he started fighting with countries like Canada, at one point, when people said, you're going to cause a trade war, he said, fine, let's just have zero tariffs. That's fine with me. That doesn't strike me as the goal he's been aiming at for 30 years. I think it was an off-the-cuff rhetorical device. But I'm happy to take him up on it. I would like to see zero tariffs. I would like to negotiate zero tariffs with Canada, and let's negotiate zero tariffs with the United Kingdom, which is about to be an independent player in the world market.
Sure. Hey, I'm with you there. Keep pressuring the administration for that.
All right.
Thanks for joining us, David Boaz.
Thank you.
Check out the Cato Institute. Thanks much. So we didn't get a chance. You were saying about the wine industry. We'll have to have him back to talk about that and how much that might be impacted as far as the Canadian trade. I guess, are Canadians known for their wine? Have you ever had Canadian wine?
I haven't. I'll stick with the California.
Yeah. Yeah. So, no, but it's very interesting how I think to watch how Trump will use this on the campaign trail, because his base is definitely blue collar, Rust Belt America, and he'll wave this in front of them, and so it'll be interesting to see if voices like David's, how that will shape the debate at all.
Yeah, and these aren't easy issues at all when we talk about the job market and the shifting of industry and technology. I mean, these are really long-term issues that we really need to focus on. So, it's going to be very, very interesting moving forward.
Yep. Let's move. Great segue to our next segment. Moving forward, Chase Winder is joining us via Skype. Chase is a Republican nominee for Utah's State Senate for District 2, and also bringing us here on set is Devalier Malone, a friend of Bold and author of Those Who Give a Damn, a manual for making a difference, in studio. You there, Chase?
Yeah, I'm here. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Chase, in February of this year, the current Utah senator of District 2 announced he would not run for re-election. Is that what sparked your interest in running, or what brought you to where you are?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually just something that I've always had a passion for in my life. I actually grew up in a family, the Winder family, with a lot of us in public service, working as county council people, sheriff, representatives, mayors, judges. And so I just kind of grew up in a culture of wanting to give back and wanting to become someone that is serving and working towards others. I was actually reading a little bit of the excerpts of How to Give a Damn, the book, and I was quite impressed with your other guest about really what kind of makes people tick and wanting to help others. And so this is something that I've always been passionate about. I've worked in education. I've co-founded an education nonprofit. I've worked with dropout students, helping to get them a second chance in life. And it's just something that I was very passionate about. And when the current senator resigned, and it's kind of a mad dash, I actually only had a couple weeks to make up my mind before the filing deadline.
Well, and Chase, you're Republican, and the senator who's retiring, Jim DeBakis, he won. He's a Democrat, and he won with 74% of the vote. Is this a very blue district that you're running in?
It is. I would say it's more progressive.
So what's your strategy? How would you overcome that?
Yeah, so a couple different things. I mean, one, I'm born and raised in this area, so I've done all my education from elementary through my master's in the district. Two is that my family and those that they know are actually pretty well known. It's funny, but our family runs a home milk delivery and a farm company called Winder Farm. So
I know that because I used to eat your ice cream when I was a girl in Winder Dairy.
BYU.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, sidebar, are you guys gonna go to Canada with this new trade deal?
I don't have any idea of the milk strategy.
Well, no, this new trade deal apparently is opening the dairy market to Canada for American dairy producers. So that was the first thing when I saw you're coming on, Mr. Winder Dairy.
So, David, are you running as a Trump Republican?
It should be Winder Deliverer. So, but I didn't want to go with too much puns there. But it's definitely an uphill battle in this district. But I'm really running to, be a fresh voice, be young. I'm 30. If I'm elected, I'd actually be the youngest elected state senator in Utah's history. And so I'm trying to bring energy. I'm trying to bring a really knowledgeable base about my city and my district. And I'm really running to give us a seat at the table. And I think that is really resonating with the voters, that they want representation and they want to be able to have someone that can really work on delivering solutions and making sure their voice is heard at the Capitol.
David, are you running as a Trump Republican? Are you bringing Trump to and offering him some milk?
You know what? No, I'm just running as myself. A lot of people ask me in this district, are you Republican? Are you Democrat? And I say yes. I'm not trying to run, for anything other than the people in this district, and to make sure that they're heard. I mean, this state in Utah, it's no secret, but it's very dominated by Republicans. And so I want to be working from within that system to represent what people care about. And it's really about the issues. I mean, they care about education. They care about air quality. They care about reducing our homeless population, reducing our opioid epidemic. And so for me, I'm just focused on the issues and not so much the national politics, because that's kind of what's motivating me to run in the first place. Is I want to make a difference and help those in the community.
Well, that's a perfect segue to bring in Dwalier, because your manual, as Chase mentioned, is called for those who give a damn, a manual for making a difference, and clearly Chase is seeking to do that in his district. What have you seen as you were writing that book? What's the winning strategy for people who have the desire to get them over the finish line?
Just like what Chad says, making sure that you talk to the issues, and not just talk to the issues, but also go out there and find people who are also affected by those issues and make sure they're registered to vote. I found in my experience and being on the road the last year and a half that they're not looking at Democrat or Republican issues in this day and time, but they're more so looking at the issues that affect them today, whether that's education, whether that's economic development, whether that's job security. I know the job report just came out today, been one of the lowest since 1969, is it? And we also have to look at those rural communities. And I take for an example, rural communities in Mississippi and the Mississippi Delta, those people still need jobs. I think what we see is a lot of the educated community, we are thriving, but a lot of our rural communities are not thriving. So we have to make sure that they have representation as well. So just what Chad is doing, making sure that he's out there with the people and speaking to the people's issues is going to be very vital for any candidate in this day and time.
Well, and Utah has some very rural areas. But Chase, is your district, I mean, Utah generally is fairly rural, but your district is more urban, correct?
Yeah, that's right. But it's still very accessible. I mean, it's nothing like New York City and some of the more high density urban areas. So we've still been out knocking doors, going to events, just, meeting folks where they are and understanding what's important to them. So, yeah, I mean, we call it the I-15 corridor from about Ogden down to Provo is, very high density urban area. But yeah, a lot of Utah is very rural and, those communities and trying to bring, as Duvalier said, economic development and jobs and educational opportunities to those across the state is also equally important to representing them as well as those that are kind of in the heart of Salt Lake City, which is Senate District 2.
Great. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Chase. We appreciate it.
Definitely. Thanks so much, everyone.
We'll keep an eye on Winder Dairy. Those ice creams, I could still taste them. Like vanilla, like 25 cents. You could actually drive through. It's like a drive-through dairy. It was like paradise for a kid. So, he has my vote for that alone, if he could give an ice cream cone to everyone.
I wanted to hear more about your book and what brought you to writing this book, because I see that you work for a software company.
So no, not a software. So I have my own
that was Chase.
consultant, my own consulting
Oh,
company.
Chase
Yes.
does. Oh, okay, sorry.
But no, yeah, author of Those Who Give a Damn. I grew up in poverty in Mississippi to a single mother there and was affected deeply by poverty. And as a child, I would listen to the radio, Charles Evers, who is Medgar Evers' brother, and I gained a passion for politics. And from there, I began to just use my voice to speak up and speak out, because as a child, I would go into my imagination, listen to Mr. Evers, and I gained this great passion for politics. And from there, I started working on the Mississippi Confederate flag issue, Emmett Till, making sure that people have a seat at the table. Part of my book talks about, as a young boy and there in Mississippi, I didn't have a seat at the table. So everybody's like, who is Duvalier Malone? Who is Duvalier? And so what I did, I took myself and I had a team of 2, and we went on tour to different small cities in Mississippi and educated people to reclaim their seat at the table. And then got Thrive into the Emmett Till rally. After hearing the news of Emmett Till's accuser, no one wanted to attack that issue. And I was a little afraid of the title of the book, because I was like, you know what, I may not be able to go into high schools, because I speak to a lot of high schools. But at that point, I said, you know what, when we see injustice, it's important for my generation to be bold and to speak out. So I was like, you know what, this title, I had got it copyrighted about a year before it even came out. But I said, you know what, it's important for us to give a damn about those issues that affect our community, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a politician. When you see something that's not right, we have to speak up and speak out against those issues. And so my manual is a hope to do that. Yeah.
Excellent.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, no, that's
look
so
forward to reading
great.
it.
Well, Duvalier, we're going to keep you here and also bring in our next Skype guest, Stephen Hicks. He's a senior scholar from the Atlas Society via Skype. Welcome, Stephen.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Stephen, tensions are very high now between the left and the right. What does this great political divide mean for our future? And how much of it do you put on Donald Trump?
Well, the divide is nothing new. If you go back in early American history, or even to any civilization that's had a broadly democratic political process, you always find factionalism, tempers running high, and so forth. And in one way, that's not a problem, because liberal democracy is meant to be a messy political process. We want people involved. We want lots of arguments. The stakes are high, so people's tempers are going to get involved. So in one way, the fact that we are having millions and millions of people following very closely these important issues is a sign of health. Now, at the same time, though, there is a lot of sickness, moral sickness that's involved, because it's one thing to have a debate, it's another thing to have a healthy debate, and a healthy debate depends on clean intellectual habits, that people have to be willing to listen to the other side's arguments and actually listen to them. They have to be open to data, they have to be open to evidence, they have to refrain from character assassination, ad hominem, and all of the cheap argumentative and rhetorical tricks that people involve. And so, if anything, that is our weakness. We do have large participation, but we have been, I think, very weak at the pre-college level and certainly at the college level at teaching people how to do those arguments very well. A big part of it does involve leadership, and here I fault my profession significantly. Humanities education has been much weaker over the course of the last generation and a half for various reasons, strongly including the rise of postmodernism. And then a lot of that is reflected in the political leadership that we see out there. Certainly Donald Trump, I think, is not a good role model, but he's as much a symptom of deeper causes as a contributor to them.
Well, and I think it's interesting you mentioned the problems on campus of a lack of intellectual discourse, openness to challenging of ideas. And it's interesting because Donald Trump's base is not at the university level. His base really tends to be more working class, blue-collar America. So do you think that might be part of the divide as far as the culture that was created at the university level versus the working class level?
I think the divide is relatively insignificant at this point. I don't think it's largely a matter of education to know how to have a civil conversation with people. People do it over the dinner table. They do it at their workplace. They know what it is to listen respectfully to their friends and other members of their family and so on. So in my experience, people who are quote unquote blue collar and people who are university educated both know those habits. So of course, in each sector, you find people who are crude. And the difference is going to be, more importantly, I think, at the university level, because those are the people who set the tone. I think all of our teachers, or 99% of them, are university educated. The journalists are 90+% educated. All of our lawyers are educated, and all of our politicians come out of that demographic as well. So they are the ones who set the tone more. And people who are less educated look up to them, and they model, they imitate, they aspire to that. So I think it's less an issue of what's going on outside of the
actually to that,
university class than it is inside.
Sure. So we just put on screen, if you can put it back up, an article from Brett Stevens from the New York Times. He is a big Trump critic. He used to be an editorial writer for the Wall Street Journal, and now he's at the New York Times. And he said, for once, I'm grateful for Trump. This is a guy who was never Trump till the very end. But he said in this case with Kavanaugh, in his opinion, that he said Trump is a bully who's standing up to other bullies. And that that's what a lot of his base thinks, is that they have been bullied by the elites, by the establishment, so that he is actually standing up for them because they're the ones who have been bullied. What's your take on that, Duvalier, in terms of this question of having a bully to fight other bullies?
In regards to that, I would say we can look at it from two ways. I don't think it's a bully fighting another bully in this particular situation. It goes back to the bigger question of our morals, values in America. It's not about a bully, but it's about what do we stand for. And if I know anything about the America that I was taught in school and the America that my family taught me there in rural Mississippi, is that you treat your neighbor right, you do good and good come back to you. We're respectful. We can agree to disagree. We're more alike than we are different. Those are things that run through our core. That is why we move through the civil rights movement. That's why we're where we are today. And when we look at where we are today, it's not about a bully, but it's about taking us back. Want to take America, make America great again. America is great, and we stand on the shoulders of greatness. And so when we look at the bigger picture, I don't foresee it as a bullying pulpit. It is a way that we are making strikes backwards, and I don't consider it bullying. It is pulling us backwards, and it's us putting ourselves over country.
You know, but Donald Trump has created that. Who were the bullies who were bullying working class people? In what way does he really care?
Well, here's an
about
example.
working-class
This Georgetown professor.
Or anyone besides himself.
Well, so here's an example. This Georgetown professor, she said white male GOP senators deserve miserable deaths and castration. This is a Georgetown professor who is I would say, part of the elite establishment. And we've seen this at other professors as well, university, in California, just really extreme language like this to say, let's bully white men, or let's use extreme vulgar language calling for violence against them. I think that's bullying.
Well, Donald Trump has done the same thing. We have a country, my God, even when he said on TV, oh, when you're arresting people, don't be so nice. You put your hand on their head. I mean, that stopped me in my tracks. And it was just so disgusting and horrible when we have such a history of racism in this country, when we have mass incarceration, when we have black men who are killed on the streets, and the president of the United States is going to come out and say some cavalier comment like that, signaling to people that it's okay to be violent. That's more destructive than this woman's ridiculous, over-the-top comment. And she's not the president of the United States, Carrie.
And I think for
if I can
me,
jump in here, the fact that we have bullying going on both sides, bad behavior, Donald Trump and the Georgetown professor, right? Absolutely. But that is a sign of a debased intellectual culture when you get to that point where you can point to not just a few weirdos whom nobody really pays attention to, but very prominent people and university professors. She is not the only professor. What she said is disgusting. It's a great stain on Georgetown, unfortunately. But she is not the only one. And there's a big difference in intellectual culture, particularly academic culture, when it's 0.1% of people who are willing to talk like that and send those signals to their students, and when you have 2 or 3% of the professoriate who is doing that. That's a huge demographic shift. And as we all know from social psychology, it only takes a few people really to poison an atmosphere. If they are active, if they are aggressive, then of course people get defensive, and then when people get defensive, they lash out, and it is a downward spiral. So what we need is, it's not really at what level a Donald Trump versus that particular professor issue. We have a debased political class, and we have a debased professoriate right at that point. Now, you can argue about whether it's 2% or 4%, but the fact is that the people in positions of leadership are not clearly sending signals of civility, just as my co-panelist was talking about. The second half of what he said was beautiful.
Stephen, I like what you said, as far as when you were mentioning the fact that it only takes a very small number of people to make a big change in the discourse. And to me, that signals hope to me. That So if it takes only a few people to poison the well, it can take a very few people to be the light. And so we thank you for joining us here. And thank you, Duvalier, for joining us. And we're going to keep this conversation going with our next panel, because I think this is going to be something, it's almost like we have to have like a nationwide therapy.
Yes, yes,
talk through all the issues.
Yes, I love the note that you ended with.
Of how people have perceived grievances, and then because they feel aggrieved, then they lash out, they feel like they've been cornered, and then they say things that they might regret later. Even Judge Kavanaugh wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal saying, I probably said some things that I shouldn't have said in that hearing. He said that in the Wall Street Journal himself. So the temperature is just high. And I want to bring back Brandon Straka. I think we were one of the first shows where he announced his campaign, the Walkaway campaign, which has gone viral since then. And Pete Holmberg, he's a Republican candidate for New York State Senate. Welcome, Brandon and Pete.
Thank you. You were my very first on-camera interview. It's true. That's right. Yeah.
I'm excited about it. Yes. He was very excited about it. Yes.
Good to be here.
So tell us a little bit about the campaign. How's it going?
Campaign is going great. So for anyone who doesn't know, the Walkaway campaign is a campaign designed initially for people walking away from the Democratic Party and the ideology of liberalism. It started on Facebook as a testimonial campaign. Right now we have about 185,000 people on the Facebook group, on all social media platforms, about 390,000 people who are telling their testimonials and walking away.
What are they walking to?
Well, I don't tell people. That's a great question. No, that's a great question. I don't. That's the thing. I always say, I'm not starting a religion. I'm not starting a cult. I'm not starting a new political party. Walkaway is a journey, not a destination. I'm not encouraging people to leave groupthink and walk into more groupthink. It's really about taking a look at what's going on the left and walking away. We have people in the campaign who are independents, who are libertarians, who are Republicans. Some love the president, some don't love the president. But so where they're walking to is really going to be based off of their own journey and their own research that they do. I found myself in the Republican Party after about a year of doing research, and I'm a conservative, but I certainly don't tell other people that's what they have to do.
So, in your campaign,
Yes.
you're running for office. You've got a very tough row that you're trying to hoe because you're running here in Manhattan in a
Absolutely.
very, very liberal district. So,
I'm
what makes
running in
you
the-
think you can overcome those odds?
I'm running in the most Republican district in Manhattan, in the Upper East Side, and I'm running in the age of Bill de Blasio. And when I was on the streets getting petitions signed in June, I had people saying to me, "Can't you run against Mayor de Blasio?" And these were Democrats. And the Democrats in this town have a higher level of animosity towards the mayor than the Republicans do because they feel betrayed by him. I am on the Stop de Blasio line. I'm on the Reform line, the Independent line, the Republican line. We petitioned for the Stop de Blasio line because people are enraged with the mayor. And the obsession with national politics has allowed politicians all across the country and on both sides of the aisle to get away with murder. Local government officials are getting away with all sorts of things because we're so obsessed with this very interesting situation in Washington. It's riveting. So people, just this week, Mayor de Blasio hired a chief democracy officer for over $160,000 a year. He just gave another aide of his a 60% raise. I don't know many people getting 60% raises, certainly not in government, but we're consumed with, everyone's like, what about Trump? What about Trump? Donald Trump has done a brilliant job of getting inside people's heads, especially liberals. They're obsessed with Donald Trump. And so it distracts people. So the Trump obsession, he's very good at it. He's very good at getting people Trump, 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 Trump. And they lose sight of local issues. We have a new cab riding tax coming in below 96th Street in Manhattan starting January 1. It'll be $2.50.
Wait! I thought he liked cabs because of what he did to Uber.
Oh, no. All the state government. This is a state government. We have a budget that says for Uber, Lyft, yellow cabs, a new
Across the
tax.
board, not just cabs.
Across the board, starting January 1, $2.75 for Uber and Lyft, $2.50 for yellow cabs, anytime you're in a cab below 96th Street in Manhattan. And that's a lot of money. But it got into the state budget. Nobody paid attention because Trump, 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 Trump. Let's just obsess on the president and ignore local issues. And that's what my campaign is about. It's getting people to focus on local issues again.
Well, that's so great to hear because that's really, really important because these are the things that do affect our lives on a daily basis. So let me ask you, because you will be a key person that would have a vote in the state Senate.
Yes.
What is your position on the Reproductive Health Act?
I have stated very publicly that I would vote yes on the Reproductive Health Act. And the reason is that it does not extend the weeks of it's 24 weeks now, it would be 24 weeks then. All that does, the Reproductive Health Act is not, all it does is it creates a situation. If you're in that situation, this is delicate for me to talk about. I'm not a woman, but I've had friends who are in the situation. So it gets personal because I've seen up close when someone is getting a late stage abortion for health reasons. That woman is in hell. That woman's family is in hell. Currently, we have laws that put the doctor performing that abortion for the sake of the health of the mother. That doctor's legal status is in jeopardy. The Reproductive Health Act solves that issue. It means the doctor has no legal worries. And they're still in hell, but the Reproductive Health Act takes just one layer of that hell and removes it. It's a compassionate bill. That's why I would vote yes on it. And I've declared that in my debate with my opponent last week.
Well, as far as, abortion is certainly a big hot topic as it relates to the Supreme Court, and that's motivating, I think, a lot of the activism we're seeing on the left. But I want to ask you, Brandon, about this march that you're planning. Tell us a bit more about this, and have you seen an uptick because of what's happening with Kavanaugh in your registration?
I've seen a huge uptick in registration, and it's been amazing, and also a whole spectrum, I think, of stories. We saw thousands of people come into the campaign in the last 2 weeks who have been saying this was their final straw. They feel like it's been nothing but histrionics and theatrics from the Democratic Party, that the Kavanaugh hearings were well over the line for them. And there was one, even a woman in her 70s said, I have voted Democrat my entire life. I even volunteered for the DNC since I was 13 years old. She said, this is it. I'm done. This was my final straw. I'm walking away. And so the March on Washington is October 26th through the 28th weekend. The march itself is on the 27th. We're doing a gala dinner at Trump International Hotel on Friday night to kick off the weekend. The march and rally on the 27th and a closing brunch on Sunday the 28th, also at Trump International. Dinesh D'Souza will be speaking. We have Stacey Dash. We have Buzz Patterson, Joy Vila, who I think is on the show later today, and a good friend of mine.
She's a friend of Bold. Yeah.
I love her. And so, I mean, we're in a whole host of amazing speakers. It's going to be an incredible weekend. But what we're really showing people is that the Republican Party that I think people have in their minds, because I think of the narrative that is pushed from the left of the racist, bigoted, straight white male Republican Party, well, we're going to blow the lid right off of that, because we have a very open, inclusive, and diverse group of speakers, which I think really represents what the Republican Party is now today. It's younger, it's fresher, it's open, it's diverse. And we want people to see that in human form, with people, human bodies there at the march.
People are shocked when I tell them, when they say, well, will say to me on the street when I'm palm carding, I'm gay. I'm like, so am I. And they're shocked that there's a gay Republican. And that's another reason I'm breaking through, is that I'm breaking the norm and breaking the stereotype of what it means to be a Republican.
You're gay.
Sonia, you want to respond?
No, I think it's terrific. I think it's really, I mean, there's so much polarization. Mm-hmm. We have to not feel so different. I think it's really important. We've got the Democrats who are really on the left. We need more moderate Democrats and more moderate Republicans that will all work much better when we get together to sit down and try and figure out all of these issues to make move the country forward.
We can find common ground.
Right.
We're finding it.
And so I'm curious about what's happening with Kavanaugh. We have a polling from NPR, and Twitter mentioned it in their moments yesterday. If we can put that polling from NPR, they were saying that the Republicans held a 10-point advantage over Republicans, and now that has shrunk the gap, and they're attributing it to Kavanaugh, that people are motivated on the right because of what's happening with Kavanaugh. So, and that's what I find interesting, because it seems like the fervor among the left, which was to push on Kavanaugh, it might have this backlash effect. And this is what you're seeing, or?
That's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm feeling myself. And yeah, I mean, I believe, I like what you said a second ago about, I mean, I believe that sort of, if we could get to this place where we're growing the center ground, where there are sort of the moderates on the left and the moderates on the right, which is what I feel like my campaign is about, bringing people together. But at the end of the day, what I think we're all really walking away from most of all is the name calling, the violence, the vandalism, and really this lack of truth. And now we might have a debate over where that lack of truth is, but I believe that the liberal media is causing an enormous division in this country. I think that that's where it all stems from, and I think that people are starting to see it more and more all the time. We have to be able to be honest and tell the truth in this country. People are not getting accurate information. They're not getting accurate depictions of who this president is, who his administration is, or who his followers are. And I think that people are waking up to this fact more and more every day, and that's where I think the center is going to grow. I mean, we want civility again. We want respect and decency. We want dignity in our conversations, and that's what we're going to find in the center, but I don't think we're going to find it.
Brandon, and so you use the moniker the unsilent majority.
Minority. Unsilent minority.
The unsilent minority?
Yeah. That's me, though.
Yeah, but because you're gay?
Right.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but so you're not using unsilent majority.
No, so it was a play on the phrase silent majority, because
right.
Most Americans belong to this silent majority. And so before I even did the walkway campaign, my social media persona was the unsilent minority, because I have a big mouth and I'm gay. So I'm the unsilent minority. Now that the walkway campaign has blown up, people are like, well, it's kind of confusing. Isn't it the silent majority? I'm like, well, I didn't know that I was going to become like this big deal. I just thought I was like this little YouTube, vlogger. And so the unsilent minority is me personally, but the silent majority, I think, are the majority of Americans who are now starting to speak up and becoming unsilent.
Well, and so that's what I'm wondering, because you look at the base, Trump's base is like 38%. He can walk on that, and he'll never fall, but That's not a majority. And isn't that where the problem is, that we don't actually have a majority, that, he hasn't been able to persuade a majority of actual voters as it relates to the popular vote? And is that part of what's causing the division?
No, I disagree with that, because I think that we saw the silent majority make their statement in 2016 in November. I mean, we were told time and time and time again that he had a 3% chance of winning, that she was going to win in a landslide. We all totally got a shock on election day in 2016, and that's because the silent majority stepped up. They did what they do. They kept their mouths shut, but they went in the voting booth and they pulled the lever for Trump. So
there is a closet Trump vote. There is on the Upper East Side. There are Democrats who are saying, I'm not telling my friends. There's an embarrassment factor. I know plenty of people who think that the one place you can tell the truth in this country is in the ballot booth. And on November 6th, people will be doing that.
Yep.
So,
what were you going to say? I want to know what you were going to say.
Well, just a couple things. I mean, I watch Fox News, and that is in no way not unbiased, or that they will bring you on TV just to try and make you look bad. They don't try to just have a real dialogue, as Stephen was saying earlier. So I think it's on both ends. I don't think that...
Well, I've seen you on Fox News. I thought that Tucker asked you some pretty fair questions, actually.
Oh, really?
I did.
He wanted to, why the NRA should be...
Well, I think the episode that I saw, he was asking you about hijabs, because you thought that it was female empowerment for women to be wearing hijabs.
Actually, I said it's every individual's... If a woman feels empowered by that, she should be able to wear that.
Well, I think people should watch the segment and see for themselves. I felt like it was a very fair interview.
That one was. Yeah,
all right.
I owned
all right.
that
well,
day.
we have an agreement there. There we go. Okay, perfect. But I do agree that Fox News is definitely not 50-50.
Nothing is 50-50. I watch MSNBC and Fox. That's what I do. I watch both, and then I figure it out for myself. There is no such thing as objective news anymore. You have to watch a lot of different news and then figure it out for yourself, and read a lot.
I'm glad that you watch Fox News to diversify your media appetite, and I think that's I think more people should do that on the left and the right to listen to what the other side is saying.
And if we've got a moment to add to what our guest from the Atlas Society was saying, is we need really in school to teach more civics.
Yes.
This whole idea of the civil conversation, how to have to argue, to be able to disagree and have that healthy debate. And also consent, as part of our sex education. Also this issue about being a critical thinker, how you look at the news, so that everybody on their own.
And analysis, I think that's hugely important, teaching people how to analyze what they're taking in, what they're reading, and understand skepticism too. And Pete made a really good point a minute ago when he said read more. I think that we're starting to see a lot more people getting interested in independent journalism and finding their news that way. I think less people are tuning into the mainstream media on either side, because I think that they notice that slant more and more. But I think that independent journalism, and even bloggers.
Or just,
they're turning into bold.
You asked me about the Reproductive Health Act. Anyone forming an opinion on that should read the act, read the bill.
Yes.
Read bills. Go online, click. It's very easy. I've read a lot of bills. Read legislation. And local issues will unite us. They'll bring us together. Trash not being picked up, we can all agree on is bad.
Exactly.
All right, let's end on that note.
Love it.
Thank you so much.
Thank
That's
you.
a really good conversation.
Thanks, ladies.
And just breaking news, the Senate just voted to advance the Kavanaugh for the final vote, which is going to be tomorrow. We are getting word that Murkowski voted no. Collins said that she will announce her vote this afternoon. And the vote to invoke cloture was 51-49. So it's going to move forward. We'll see what happens with Collins. It could be one of those key votes. Let's move on to our next guest via Skype. Claudia Rosette is the Foreign Policy Fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. Hi, Claudia.
Hi, how are you guys?
Hi, Claudia.
Hi there.
So the Independent Women's Forum hosted an event this week called Tyrants, Terrorists, and Threats to 21st Century World Order. Can you tell us a little bit about this event?
Yeah, sure. Well, this is something where if you want to talk about things where Americans need to come together, since the end of the Cold War 27 years ago with the Soviet collapse, there are a set of threats again rising where Americans, for all our domestic disputes and arguments with each other, need to really start focusing on some of the things that are out there that are a serious threat to our country. And we were talking about some of these, and it was, when September 11th happened, we heard a lot about how, well, terrorism is the major threat. And it had done terrible things. In New York especially, you saw the collapse of the Twin Towers. But we're now looking also at nation states, what we're sort of calling the Big Four: Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. They're not on a par. They pose threats in different ways. But we were looking at this, as well as terrorism, as well as, I'm here to make your day, as well as some of the technologies that have been evolving, especially cyber, where we now have wonderful things in our lives because of all the things that have happened in cyber technology. But we're also, in some ways, much more potential targets for attack.
Hey, Claudia, we got to get it straight. If we don't know the risk, we can't prevent attacks. So we're glad that you're highlighting this. But I'm curious to get your thoughts more broadly on kind of the Trump approach to foreign policy, because I find it very interesting that he's definitely calling for a rebuilding, bigger budget for defense, but he's also calling on our allies to build their defenses and be more responsible. And he's also saying that we shouldn't be in the business of building states and state building abroad. This is such an, it's not the traditional kind of hawkish neocon policy. It almost seems like a hybrid. How would you describe it?
Well, it sort of is. And in the main, actually, I think he's been doing a lot of really good and important things on the ground. We can argue over whether we like his tweets or not, but if you actually look at what he's been doing, we had, unfortunately, under President Obama, I think, a vision for foreign policy that sort of didn't take into account human nature and began to look more and more like the approach to World War II in the 30s. If we don't look at it, it isn't there. If we try and appease people, they'll be nice to us. And President Trump has done things like, to take one of the controversial moves, getting rid of the Iran nuclear deal, where that was received with great dismay and some, among some. I think, as I see it, what he was actually doing was saying this deal will not stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons. We've got to find some way that actually addresses the realities. So maybe that's a good way to put a lot of it. Not everything. It's not completely consistent across the board, but in the main, he's been bringing reality back into foreign policy and saying we need to protect this country. It's a tough world. What you just mentioned, asking our allies to pay more, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, where the U.S. is by far the biggest spender on defense, that comes out of your tax dollars. And he's asking things like, could Germany, a very wealthy country in Europe, sort of please step up and spend on defense the amount that it actually promised. Among other things, if you're worried about Russia, and we all should be at this point, Germany is kind of on the front lines. So that's basically, I think it's been a turn very much in an important direction. It's a direction that may help avert what was looking like a sort of rising chance of war. We throw a lot of things into this pot, including China.
Well, yes, and we saw the vice president's speech this week about China and saying that it was a greater risk to our democracy than Russia, and talking about China's retaliation. And I believe it was MSNBC put up a very interesting map of the Trump base on the U.S. and then the targets of Chinese response of tariffs and just the considerable overlap to say China is really trying to turn the dial up on Trump by going after the farmers who are his base. Yeah. Do you agree with the vice president's assessment that China is a bigger threat to democracy than Russia?
I do, in the sense that China sort of has a more substantial base. It has a much bigger economy. It's got sort of, as you go, what is the trajectory? Yes. At the same time, in sort of ranking them like a horse race, I don't quite look at it that way, because these countries work with each other. They learn from each other. It's sort of a network, if you like. Axis of evil is kind of went out of fashion, but if this is, if you like, a network of hostility. We had at the Independent Women's Forum conference on tyrants, terrorists, and so on Wednesday, as our keynote speaker, the woman who is the principal deputy director of national intelligence. In other words, she's the career intelligence professional who helps Dan Coates lead the intelligence community and so on. And I had the chance to ask her about this. Do these countries learn from each other? And the answer is, oh, yes, they do. So it's not only that, China may be the more substantial threat, but for instance, China and Russia have been holding, while we've all been debating, having our knockdown dragouts over domestic politics, China and Russia have been holding large joint military maneuvers. That's troubling because the common enemy there is basically us.
Well, Claudia, thank you for raising this important issue for us. We appreciate it. We hope you'll come back soon.
It was a pleasure to join you. Thank you.
Thanks. Our final segment is our Bookster segment. Bookster is a website for book lovers and much more. We are going to bring in another Skype guest in just a minute. Her name is Soraya Shamali, and she's the director of Women's Media Center Project and author of Rage Becomes Her, The Power of Women's Anger.
She should be able to speak well on that today.
I think, it's a very, the timing of her book, I don't think could have been more opportune. And it's very interesting. We had someone earlier in a previous episode of Bold talking about, feminism and, what it means to be a feminist. And I'm conservative, I'm pro-life. And she said, well, then that means you can't be a feminist if you're pro-life. And I'm just like, that's like Mean Girls telling me I can't sit at the table. Like, it's all about, let's have a conversation now about this, because there are things that really upset me as a woman that I think would unite womankind. And it's about channeling that rage, I hope, into something healthy and getting something productive out of it. So let's welcome. Are you there?
Hello.
Good morning, Soraya.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well.
Hi, Soraya. I'm such a fan of the Women's Media Center. I was part of the inaugural class.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yes. So thank you so much for all that you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today.
Yes. What an interesting time for you to come out with this book now. I think that on every podcast and every show that I'm watching, you're really seeing women's anger come to the front. And so tell us a little bit about your book and how it is playing right now with everything happening in our country with the Kavanaugh nomination.
No, the book really did come out of the election. I had been writing about these issues for a very long time, but anger was so palpable in the election. And it was palpable everywhere. It really didn't matter what your political orientation was. And it seemed, certainly based on surveys, that women in particular were angry. And so the book is really an assessment of why that anger is not welcome, really, politically. It acts politically in times of great crisis, but in women's lives, we're very familiar with the fact that if we express anger interpersonally or certainly professionally, we actually grow more powerless as opposed to powerful. Whereas when men do, power accrues to them. And the question that I wanted to interrogate was why and what role that construction of anger in our society played in inequality.
And what did you find? Because I've seen that research where if a man expresses anger, then he's perceived as powerful and standing up for something, whereas a woman is perceived as being aggressive or hostile or difficult. So
exactly.
Why is there that discrepancy?
Well, I would add to that, and I think this is really important. It's not only that she might be perceived as difficult, but that she's perceived as less competent and credible, right? So there's less trust in the woman, whereas a man gains in influence, right? And I think that has deep roots in our culture, in our religiosity. It is part of the way we traditionally socialize boys and girls to enact their emotions. boys are not taught that much about the wide spectrum of emotions, and instead learn a lot about aggression, and which is a behavior related to anger, whereas girls tend to be discouraged from showing anger. And that goes along with having an other focus, making other people comfortable, setting others at ease, being nurturing. So it starts in really early childhood in our individual lives. But generally speaking, if you just look at our history and our philosophy and our religion, you can see the strains of this throughout all of those.
So, Soraya, did you take a look at, how that plays out either in the workplace or for women who are running for office? And I've seen some really interesting things where consultants really had to test the different types of promos and ads and language that they used with women candidates.
Yes, for sure. I mean, we've seen that over and over again. About 5 years ago, the Women's Media Center did a study into the messaging around women candidates, and it was called Name It, Change It. And it really showed these differences in coverage of expression and emotional expression. So even in the last election, you could see both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump leveraging anger. They could leverage their own anger, and they could tap into populist anger. But in fact, a woman candidate like Hillary Clinton had to stay quite composed and demure and calm in her affect, because to be seen as angry would have undermined her position and any credibility that she had. And I think that we're familiar with that in our personal and professional lives too. I mean, if you're a Black woman, you don't even have to do anything, right? There is this stereotype of the angry Black woman, and just waking up in the morning makes you aggressive and angry to some people. If you if you're a Hispanic, you tend to be categorized as sexy or hot or fiery when you're angry, which is really trivializing to what you're trying to say.
So, Soraya, I'm curious. So you mentioned about men acting out their anger and then being aggressive. I wrote a piece earlier this week on Bold about what's happening with it's a sidebar, but the story was about our female prison population and how the conditions they're in are really terrible. There's no maternal care. Women are still being shackled even when they're going to give childbirth. Mm-hmm. Mental health care is really abysmal for women in prison. But I was surprised I didn't realize the big gender gap in terms of people who are imprisoned, so that it's less than 10% of prisoners in federal prisons are female. So in some respects, isn't it healthier the way we're socializing women to say, don't act out on your anger in a violent way? And isn't that something that we might want to encourage men to not act out their anger? I mean, what's the solution? Because is that the flip side of socializing women to not act out their anger, that they're less likely to commit violent crime?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot going on there. I'm not suggesting that women assume the standard of male behavior that is so destructive to our society, right? I mean, the problem with masculine violence is that a lot of it is the result of not having the ability as men to share emotions that cause fear or anxiety or sadness. And so there are two outcomes to that. One is self-harm, so we see high rates of suicide, and the other is violence as an expression of frustrated emotion or any kind of critical anxiety that men may have, particularly anxieties related to masculine identity. The book is not at all saying, here's a standard of anger, explosive rage, or violence is the solution. What I'm really saying in this book is, right now, because of the way we treat anger, it's unhealthy for the society in general. For women, that unhealthiness comes in very material ways that are self-harming. So if we are self-silencing, if we are self-surveilling, if we are ruminating about our anger, that actually becomes material in our bodies. It is implicated in mental distress. It's implicated in a whole range of health issues. It impairs our ability to deal with pain. But the fact is that the way we are socialized encourages us to do that. And so the intent is not to say, hey, explosive violent rage is good, but to say there's a difference between being assertive, being aggressive, and being angry, and we need to make those differences clear to people, and we need to not hurt ourselves by conforming to this policing of our expression. We need to find creative, joyful, compassionate ways to use the energy in the emotion.
And
to
what are
achieve
some
our
of those,
goals.
I guess, and obviously our viewers will have to check out your book, Rage Becomes Her, The Power of Women's Anger. But just real quick for our viewers, give them a taste of advice or specific things they can do to channel their anger in a healthy way.
The first thing is just to label it. Just be able to say, oh, you know what? It's not that I'm just frustrated or stressed. I'm angry. And what information is that anger giving to me? Label it, understand what it means, understand what needs to change, hold the people around you accountable. Don't minimize your own anger or its effect. And be comfort with discomfort. Be comfortable with that. You're going to make people uncomfortable. And so that's okay. It'll pass. But you need to be able to name what is bothering you, whether it is political or professional or personal, and then have the community around you respond to that. And I think that's the hard part, really coming to terms with whether the people around you, whether they're intimates or employers, care. How much are they vested in your success and happiness? And that's, I think, a good way to think about anger, because it is as connected to empathy and compassion and justice as it is to fear and contempt or any of the negative attributes we think of.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Soraya Shemali, for joining us here. And our viewers, make sure to check out the book, Rage Becomes Her, The Power of Women's Anger.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us here today on Facebook and Periscope. Don't forget to like our page, Bold TV, on Facebook and Twitter, Instagram as well. If you like the show, make sure to share it with your friends. Thank you so much for joining me today. I know it's been a wild ride, Sonia. And
I learned so much.
Oh, well, we
Really
hope
did.
you'll come back. We hope we didn't scare you away. And make sure you stay tuned right here for Bold Business coming here at 12 noon Eastern and Bold Live coming at 2 p.m. Have a great weekend, everyone.